When single father Matthias Blackwood picked up a mysterious passenger at 2 a.m. outside Denver's most exclusive hotel, he had no idea that one honest conversation about his struggles would lead the reclusive tech billionaire to offer him a job that would change everything. But the real shock came when Matthias discovered his passenger's true identity and the life-altering secret she'd been hiding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed steadily against the windshield of Matthias Blackwood's weathered Toyota Camry as he sat in the pickup lane outside the Grandview Plaza Hotel at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night. The luxury hotel's golden lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered coins, a stark reminder of the world that existed just beyond his reach. Matthias adjusted the rearview mirror to check on his sleeping 7-year-old son, Jasper, curled up in the back seat with his worn stuffed tiger clutched tightly against his chest. This wasn't how Matthias had planned to spend his Tuesday night, or any night for that matter. Jasper was supposed to be safely asleep at their small apartment in Millfield Heights, but their elderly babysitter, Mr. Chen, had called in sick with the flu, leaving Matthias with no choice but to bring his son along for the late-night driving shift. The extra income from surge pricing during the early morning hours was too crucial to pass up, especially with rent due in 3 days and only $52 in his checking account. Matthias had been driving for Ride Connect for 8 months now, ever since he'd lost his job as a logistics coordinator when the shipping company where he worked was bought out by a larger corporation. The new owners had restructured operations, which apparently meant eliminating his position along with 15 others. At 31, Matthias found himself starting over in a job market that seemed to value either advanced degrees he didn't have or energy he struggled to maintain while raising Jasper alone. His phone chimed with the familiar notification sound that meant a new passenger request. Matthias glanced at the screen. Pickup at the Grandview Plaza, destination unknown. The passenger rating was 5 stars with over 180 rides, which usually meant an easy trip with someone who understood rideshare etiquette. More importantly, the location suggested someone with money who might tip generously if he provided excellent service. Matthias gently shook Jasper's shoulder. "Buddy, I need to pick someone up. Stay buckled in and try to keep sleeping, okay?" Jasper mumbled something incoherent and shifted position, his tiger sliding to the floor. Matthias retrieved the stuffed animal and tucked it back into his son's arms, feeling the familiar pang of guilt that accompanied these late-night driving sessions. Jasper never complained about the irregular schedule or the long hours spent in the car, but Matthias knew this wasn't the childhood he dreamed of providing for his son. The passenger emerged from the hotel's glass doors with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being escorted to waiting vehicles. She was a woman in her early 40s, wearing an expensive-looking dark coat and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Matthias made in a month. Her silver hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and even in the dim lighting, Matthias could see the kind of understated elegance that only came with serious money. But there was something else about the woman's demeanor that caught Matthias's attention, a heaviness in her shoulders, a distance in her eyes that suggested someone carrying the weight of difficult decisions or profound loneliness. Matthias had learned to read people during his months of driving strangers around the city, and this passenger struck him as someone who rarely let her guard down. "Matthias?" the woman asked, approaching the passenger side door with what seemed like deliberate politeness. "That's me. You must be." Matthias glanced at his phone to check the passenger name. "Evangeline?" "Yes, thank you for the quick pickup." Evangeline settled into the front passenger seat, her movements economical and precise. "I hope you don't mind, but I haven't decided on a destination yet. Would it be possible to just drive for a while? I'll pay for the time, of course." Matthias nodded, though the request was unusual. Most of his passengers had specific destinations and wanted to get there as quickly as possible, but Evangeline's polite tone and obvious willingness to pay for an extended ride made the arrangement appealing, especially given Matthias's current financial situation. "No problem at all. Any particular direction you'd like to head?" "Away from downtown," Evangeline said simply. "Somewhere quiet where we can talk without the noise of traffic." As Matthias pulled away from the hotel, he caught Evangeline's reflection in the rearview mirror studying Jasper with an expression of gentle curiosity rather than annoyance. Many passengers complained about drivers who brought children along, viewing it as unprofessional or distracting. "I'm sorry about having my son with me," Matthias said preemptively. "My babysitter got sick and I couldn't afford to cancel tonight's shift. I know it's not ideal, but he's a good kid, and he'll sleep through the whole ride." "Please don't apologize," Evangeline replied, her voice carrying an unexpected warmth. "He's beautiful. What's his name?" "Jasper. He's 7, and he's probably dreaming about becoming an astronaut. Last week he spent his allowance on a book about space missions." Matthias smiled, feeling the familiar pride that came with talking about his son's ambitions. "That's wonderful. It sounds like he has a father who encourages his dreams." The compliment caught Matthias off guard. He was used to criticism about his parenting choices, bringing Jasper to work, living in a neighborhood that wasn't ideal, working nights instead of being home for bedtime stories. Evangeline's acceptance felt like a small gift. "I try. It's not easy being a single dad, especially when you're starting over professionally at 31. Matthias found himself being more honest than he typically was with passengers. Something about Evangeline's presence encouraged openness rather than the polite small talk that usually filled these rides. "Starting over how?" Evangeline asked. And Matthias sensed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. As they drove through the quieter neighborhoods beyond downtown Denver, Matthias found himself sharing his story: the job loss, the struggle to find stable employment, the challenge of providing for Jasper while building a new career. Evangeline listened without interrupting, asking thoughtful questions that suggested she was genuinely interested in Matthias's experiences rather than making conversation to pass time. "You mentioned logistics coordination," Evangeline said as they paused at a red light. "Did you enjoy that work?" "I loved it, actually. There's something satisfying about organizing complex supply chains and making sure everything flows smoothly. I was good at it too. I could see patterns and inefficiencies that others missed, find ways to save companies time and money." Matthias's voice carried the enthusiasm that came with discussing work he'd found meaningful. "Why did you choose that field originally?" Matthias glanced at Evangeline, noting the woman's focused attention despite the late hour. "My dad was a truck driver, and I grew up understanding how important logistics are to everything we do. I wanted to work in supply chain management, but couldn't afford a business degree as a single father. Logistics coordination let me use my skills while having more regular hours and better pay than most jobs that don't require a degree." "And now you're driving at 2 a.m. with your son in the back seat," Evangeline observed, but without judgment. "That must be incredibly difficult." "Some nights are harder than others," Matthias admitted. "But Jasper needs stability, and I refuse to give up. We'll figure it out somehow." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the city lights giving way to darker residential streets, lined with modest houses where families slept peacefully behind lit windows. Matthias found himself thinking about the contrast between his current situation and the life he'd imagined for himself and Jasper just a year ago. "Matthias," Evangeline said suddenly, her voice carrying a decision-making quality that suggested she'd been thinking about something important. "I have a proposition for you, but I want you to know that there are no strings attached and no pressure to accept." Matthias felt his pulse quicken. Propositions from wealthy passengers at 2 a.m. usually led to uncomfortable situations he'd learned to decline politely but firmly. "I run a company that provides supply chain optimization services," Evangeline continued, apparently sensing Matthias's hesitation. "We help businesses streamline their operations and reduce costs through better logistics management. Your background in coordination, combined with your obvious analytical skills and genuine understanding of operational efficiency, suggests you might be exactly what we need for a senior logistics analyst position." Matthias gripped the steering wheel tighter, uncertain whether to feel hopeful or suspicious. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't understand why you'd offer a job to someone you just met." "Because sometimes the most important qualifications can't be found on a resume," Evangeline replied. "Problem-solving ability, integrity, the capacity to see systems holistically while caring about practical outcomes, those qualities can't be taught. And in the 20 minutes we've been talking, you've demonstrated all of them." Matthias pulled into a quiet parking lot beside a small park where they could talk without the distraction of driving. Jasper stirred slightly but remained asleep, his breathing soft and steady in the back seat. "What exactly would this position involve?" Matthias asked. trying to process an opportunity that seemed too good to be true. Supply chain analysis, process optimization, helping companies identify and eliminate operational inefficiencies. Full-time position with benefits, including health insurance for you and Jasper. Evangeline's tone was matter-of-fact rather than overly enthusiastic. The salary would be $72,000 annually, which I hope would provide the stability you're looking for. Matthias felt his breath catch. The salary was more than double what he'd been making in logistics coordination, and the health insurance alone would save him hundreds of dollars each month. But the offer felt surreal, like something that happened to other people rather than single fathers driving Ride Connect at 2 a.m. "Why me?" Matthias asked directly. "You don't know anything about my work history or my qualifications beyond what I've told you in the last 20 minutes. Evangeline was quiet for a moment, looking out at the empty park where playground equipment cast strange shadows in the moonlight. "Because you're here," she said finally. "Working through the night to provide for your son. Being honest about your struggles without asking for pity. Treating a stranger with respect even when you're exhausted and worried about rent money. Those qualities matter more than any degree or certification." Matthias stared at this mysterious woman who had appeared in his car like an answer to prayers he'd been afraid to voice. The opportunity felt life-changing but also terrifying in its implications. "I need to think about this," Matthias said carefully. "It's a generous offer, but I need to understand what I'd be committing to." "Of course, take all the time you need." Evangeline pulled a business card from her briefcase and handed it to Matthias. "My contact information is there. Call me when you've decided, and we can discuss the details." Matthias accepted the card, noting the elegant design and heavy paper stock. The name printed in simple font read, "Evangeline Thorne, CEO, Thorne Strategic Solutions." As they prepared to end their unexpected conversation, Matthias realized that this late-night ride had become something far more significant than a simple transportation service. Whether or not he accepted Evangeline's offer, the encounter had reminded him that unexpected opportunities could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. "Evangeline," Matthias said as they prepared to determine a drop-off location, "thank you. Not just for the job offer, but for listening, for treating me like a person rather than just a driver. That means more than you know." Evangeline's response surprised Matthias with its vulnerability. "Thank you for reminding me why I started my company in the first place. Sometimes it takes a conversation with someone who understands real struggle to remember what actually matters." As Matthias drove Evangeline back toward the city center, both sat quietly with the weight of a conversation that had somehow changed everything for both of them, though neither fully understood how yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 days had passed since the late-night conversation that had left both Matthias and Evangeline questioning assumptions they'd held about success, struggle, and authentic human connection. Matthias stared at the elegant business card propped against his coffee maker, its heavy paper stock, a tangible reminder that his encounter with the mysterious billionaire hadn't been a sleep-deprived hallucination. Evangeline Thorne, CEO, Thorne Strategic Solutions. He'd Googled the company, of course, discovering a corporate empire worth over $3 billion that specialized in supply chain optimization for Fortune 500 companies. The woman who had sat in his passenger seat discussing his financial struggles was apparently one of the most successful business leaders in the country, featured on magazine covers and quoted in financial journals as a visionary who had revolutionized logistics management across multiple industries. The disparity between her wealth and his circumstances should have made their conversation feel surreal, but somehow it had been the most authentic interaction Matthias had experienced in months. Something about the way Evangeline had listened, really listened, to his story suggested someone who understood struggle on a level that transcended economic categories. "Dad, are you going to call the space lady?" Jasper asked from the kitchen table where he was carefully arranging his breakfast cereal into geometric patterns, a habit that never failed to remind Matthias of his son's methodical mind. "She's not a space lady, buddy. She runs a business that helps other businesses work better." Matthias poured coffee into his favorite mug, a Father's Day gift from Jasper that read "World's Best Dad" in slightly crooked hand-painted letters. "But she's really smart like astronauts, right? And she wants to give you a job where you use your brain instead of driving all night." Jasper's 7-year-old logic cut straight to the heart of the opportunity. stripping away the adult complexities that had kept Matthias awake for 3 consecutive nights. Something like that. But taking a new job is a big decision, especially when it affects both of us. Matthias sat across from his son, studying the earnest expression that made Jasper look older than his years. "What do you think? Should I call her?" Jasper considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. "Mrs. Patterson says when good things happen, you should say thank you and try to make more good things happen for other people. Maybe the space lady, Evangeline, maybe she needs your help to make good things happen." The insight struck Matthias with unexpected force. In his anxiety about accepting charity or appearing desperate, he'd overlooked the possibility that Evangeline might genuinely need his skills. Her offer could be motivated by business necessity rather than philanthropic impulse, which would make accepting it a professional transaction rather than an act of dependence. After dropping Jasper at school, Matthias found himself driving past the Thorne Strategic Solutions building, a sleek glass structure in downtown Denver's business district. He hadn't intended to visit. He was supposed to be running errands before his afternoon Ride Connect shift, but seeing the building where Evangeline worked made the job offer feel more concrete and less like a middle-of-the-night fantasy. The lobby was all polished marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to intimidate visitors while demonstrating corporate success. Matthias felt underdressed in his khakis and button-down shirt, acutely aware of the gap between his current circumstances and the professional environment where he might soon work. "Can I help you?" The receptionist was young and impeccably dressed, her smile professional but genuine. "I'm here to see Evangeline Thorne," Matthias said, then immediately felt foolish. "Actually, I don't have an appointment. She gave me her card and said to call, but I was in the neighborhood and thought." "Mr. Blackwood?" The voice came from behind him, and Matthias turned to see Evangeline approaching from the elevator bank. She looked different in the corporate environment, more polished, more intimidating, but her smile carried the same warmth he remembered from their car conversation. "Evangeline, I'm sorry for dropping by without calling. I was running errands nearby and wanted to—" Matthias paused, uncertain how to explain his impulse visit without sounding unprofessional. "I'm glad you came," Evangeline said simply. "Would you like to see the office? It might help you understand what we do here." As they rode the elevator to the 15th floor, Matthias felt the familiar nervousness that accompanied any interaction with people whose success dwarfed his own. But Evangeline's easy conversation about Jasper's school adjustment and Denver's unpredictable weather helped him relax into something approaching normal social interaction. The office space was open and collaborative, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Employees worked at standing desks clustered around large monitors displaying complex logistics, flowcharts, and real-time shipping data. The atmosphere felt energetic rather than stuffy, more like a technology startup than a traditional corporate headquarters. "This is our main operations center," Evangeline explained as they walked through the workspace. "We monitor supply chains for about 40 major clients, identifying bottlenecks and optimization opportunities in real time." Matthias found himself studying the displays with genuine fascination. The logistics problems represented on the screens were exactly the kind of challenges he'd loved solving in his previous job, but at a scale and complexity that made his former work seem simple by comparison. "The red indicators show where shipments are delayed," Evangeline continued, noting his interest. "Our job is to predict these problems before they occur and develop alternative routing or scheduling solutions." "What's causing this bottleneck here?" Matthias asked, pointing to a cluster of red indicators in what appeared to be a major shipping corridor. "Weather delays in Chicago, combined with a dock workers, slowdown in Long Beach. The traditional solution would be to reroute through alternate ports, but that creates cascading delays for other shipments." Evangeline's explanation was matter-of-fact, but Matthias sensed she was testing his analytical thinking. "What if you shifted some of the Chicago cargo to rail transport while the weather clears, and used the Long Beach delay as an opportunity to consolidate smaller shipments into larger containers?" Matthias suggested, his mind automatically working through the logistics puzzle. "You'd reduce the total number of affected routes while improving overall efficiency." Evangeline's expression shifted to something that might have been pleased surprise. "That's exactly what our senior analyst recommended this morning. How did you see that so quickly?" "It's just pattern recognition. Most logistics problems have similar underlying structures once you identify the real constraints versus the apparent ones." Matthias felt a surge of confidence as he discussed concepts that had been second nature in his previous career. "David," Evangeline called to a man working at a nearby workstation, "could you come here for a moment?" David approached with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his professional environment. He was perhaps 35, wearing the kind of casual but expensive clothes that suggested both technical expertise and management responsibility. "David, this is Matthias Blackwood, the analyst candidate I mentioned. Matthias, David Chen is our operations director. He's been advocating for additional senior staff to handle our expanding client base." David extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Evangeline tells me you have excellent instincts for supply chain optimization. We could definitely use someone with your background. The workload has been increasing faster than our ability to hire qualified people." As they talked, Matthias learned that Thorne Strategic Solutions was in a rapid growth phase, having recently signed contracts with 3 major retailers who needed comprehensive logistics overhauls. The company's reputation for innovative problem-solving had created demand that strained their current staff capacity. "The position would involve a lot of client interaction," David explained. "You'd be working directly with companies to understand their specific challenges and develop customized solutions. It's not just about analyzing data. You need to communicate complex concepts to people who may not have technical backgrounds. Like explaining to a CEO why changing their warehouse layout would save them $2 million annually without making it sound like criticism of their current operations," Evangeline added with a slight smile. Matthias found himself genuinely excited about the work description. The combination of analytical problem-solving and relationship building appealed to his strengths, while offering challenges that would require continued learning and growth. "What's the timeline for making a decision?" Matthias asked, trying to balance enthusiasm with appropriate caution. "We'd like to fill the position within 2 weeks," David replied, "but for the right candidate, we're flexible about start dates and transition planning." As they concluded the office tour, Evangeline walked Matthias back to the elevator with the kind of personal attention that suggested their conversation had extended beyond standard recruitment protocols. "What's your honest assessment?" she asked as they waited for the elevator. "Does this feel like something you'd want to pursue?" Matthias looked back at the operations center, where David and his team were already implementing the routing solution he'd suggested during their brief conversation. The sight of his idea being translated into real-world action gave him a sense of professional satisfaction he hadn't experienced since losing his previous job. "I'm interested," he said carefully, "but I need to understand something. Why are you offering this opportunity to someone you met as a Ride Connect passenger? Your company could recruit experienced analysts from anywhere in the country." Evangeline's expression grew thoughtful. "Because experience isn't the same thing as insight. You saw a solution to our Chicago bottleneck in 30 seconds that took our team 2 hours to develop. That kind of intuitive understanding can't be taught. But you don't know anything about my work history, my references, my actual qualifications beyond one conversation in a car. I know you're working multiple jobs to provide for your son. I know you approach problems methodically but creatively. I know you communicate clearly and treat people with respect regardless of their social status." Evangeline paused as the elevator arrived. "In my experience, those qualities are better predictors of success than any resume or degree." As Matthias drove home, his mind raced with possibilities and concerns. The job offer represented financial security and professional fulfillment beyond anything he'd dared hope for. But it also felt almost too convenient, like a fairy tale solution that might disappear if he examined it too closely. That evening, as he helped Jasper with homework at their small kitchen table, Matthias found himself thinking about the contrast between his current life and the opportunity Evangeline was offering. The transition from struggling single father to well-paid corporate analyst seemed almost too dramatic to be real. "Dad, you look happy," Jasper observed, looking up from his math problems. "Did you decide about the job?" "I'm thinking about it very seriously," Matthias replied, "but I want to make sure it's the right decision for both of us." "Will we still live here?" "For now, yes. Even if I take the job, we don't have to change everything at once." Jasper nodded with the adaptability that had helped him navigate their financial struggles without losing his natural optimism. "I think you should try it. You're really good at solving problems, and maybe they have problems that need you to solve them." That night, as Matthias reviewed Evangeline's business card one final time before calling to schedule a formal interview, he realized that his 7-year-old son had articulated the most important truth about the opportunity. It wasn't charity or luck, but a genuine match between his skills and their needs. Tomorrow, he would take the first step toward discovering whether a chance encounter with a billionaire passenger could really transform both their lives. The formal interview took place on a Thursday morning in Evangeline's corner office, a space that somehow managed to feel both impressive and approachable. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Denver and the mountains beyond, while personal touches, photographs of what appeared to be charity events, a small collection of books on leadership and social responsibility, and a single orchid on her desk, suggested someone who valued substance over corporate theater. Matthias had spent the previous evening preparing for standard interview questions, researching the company's major clients, and reviewing his own work history for examples that might demonstrate relevant experience. But as he sat across from Evangeline's mahogany desk, he realized this conversation would be different from any job interview he'd previously experienced. Before we discuss the technical aspects of the position, Evangeline began, "I want to be completely transparent about something. Thorne Strategic Solutions is facing a challenge that goes beyond our current staffing needs." Matthias felt a flutter of anxiety. Had he misunderstood the opportunity? Was there some complication that would make the position less attractive than it had initially appeared? "Our success has created an interesting problem," Evangeline continued. "We've grown so rapidly that we're struggling to maintain the personal touch that originally differentiated us from larger consulting firms. Our clients are starting to complain that our recommendations feel generic, like we're applying templates rather than understanding their unique circumstances." "That's a common issue with scaling professional services," Matthias replied, relieved that the challenge was operational rather than financial. "As you grow, it becomes harder to maintain the relationship-based approach that built your reputation." "Exactly. And that's where your background becomes particularly valuable." Evangeline pulled out a thick folder containing what appeared to be client feedback surveys and performance metrics. "Your experience as a Ride Connect driver, combined with your logistics expertise, gives you something our other analysts lack: the ability to connect with people across different social and economic backgrounds." Matthias frowned, uncertain whether this was a compliment or a subtle indication that he was being hired for his diversity rather than his skills. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." "Our client base includes everyone from startup founders to Fortune 500 executives to family business owners. Each group has different communication styles, different priorities, different ways of understanding complex information." Evangeline opened the folder and showed him several client testimonials. "The feedback consistently indicates that our most successful projects happen when the analyst can adapt their approach to match the client's perspective." Reading through the testimonials, Matthias began to see the pattern Evangeline was describing. Clients praised analysts who could speak their language, who understood not just the technical aspects of logistics optimization, but the human factors that influence decision-making in different organizational cultures. "You're looking for someone who can translate technical concepts into terms that resonate with different types of business leaders," Matthias said, beginning to understand his potential value beyond pure analytical ability. "More than that, we need someone who can identify the real problems behind the stated problems. Someone who can see when a logistics issue is actually a communication breakdown, or when an efficiency challenge is really about employee morale." Evangeline's expression grew more animated as she discussed the complexity of client consulting. "Your background gives you insight into how operational challenges affect real people's daily lives." David Chen appeared in the doorway with a laptop and what appeared to be a client presentation. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Meridian retail situation has escalated. They're threatening to cancel the contract unless we can solve their holiday shipping crisis by tomorrow." Evangeline gestured for David to join them. "This is actually perfect timing. Matthias, would you be interested in observing a real client problem? It might give you a better sense of what this job would involve." For the next hour, Matthias listened as David and Evangeline worked through a complex logistics nightmare involving a major retailer whose holiday inventory was stranded in 3 different ports due to cascading shipping delays. The client was facing potential stockouts during their busiest sales period, with revenue implications in the tens of millions. "What's the client's biggest fear?" Matthias asked during a lull in their analysis. "Missing the holiday sales window," David replied immediately. "They're worried about empty shelves during Black Friday weekend." "But what's their real fear?" Matthias pressed. "What are they afraid to tell you because it would make them look bad?" Evangeline looked at him with sharp interest. What do you think? Matthias studied the shipping manifests and delivery schedules spread across the conference table. They're afraid they've overpromised to customers. They probably started advertising specific products for holiday delivery before confirming their supply chain could support those commitments. Now they're facing a choice between disappointing customers or admitting they made scheduling promises they couldn't keep. That's... David paused, checking his notes. That's exactly what their operations manager said in confidence yesterday. How did you see that? Because I've been there, Matthias replied simply. Maybe not with shipping logistics, but with making promises to my son that I wasn't sure I could keep. When you're under pressure to maintain confidence, either from customers or from a 7-year-old, you sometimes commit to outcomes before you've figured out how to deliver them. Evangeline and David exchanged a look that suggested Matthias had identified something they'd suspected but hadn't articulated. The client's problem wasn't just operational. It was about maintaining credibility with customers while managing internal panic about overextended commitments. So how would you approach this differently? Evangeline asked. Matthias walked to the whiteboard and began sketching a timeline that included both shipping logistics and customer communication strategies. Instead of just solving the delivery delays, you help them turn the crisis into an opportunity to build customer loyalty. They acknowledge the shipping challenges honestly, offer meaningful compensation for delayed deliveries, and use the extra time to add value. Gift wrapping, personalized notes, maybe bonus items that show they care about making things right. That would require them to admit the delays instead of hoping to solve them invisibly, David observed. Exactly. But admitting problems while demonstrating solutions builds more trust than pretending everything is perfect. Matthias thought about his own experience with Jasper. How honesty about their financial struggles had actually strengthened their relationship rather than undermining his parental authority. The logistics optimization still matters, he continued, but it's in service of a larger strategy that acknowledges the human element. Their customers will remember how the company handled the crisis more than they'll remember the specific delivery dates. Evangeline was taking notes rapidly, her expression suggesting she was seeing the client situation from an entirely new perspective. This approach would require us to expand our consultation beyond logistics into customer relations and crisis management. Which is exactly what distinguishes your firm from larger consulting companies that focus only on operational efficiency, Matthias replied. You're not just optimizing systems. You're helping businesses navigate the human complexities that make those systems work or fail. David was already on his phone, presumably calling the Meridian retail team to discuss the revised approach. As he stepped away to handle the conversation, Evangeline turned back to Matthias with an expression of obvious satisfaction. You've just demonstrated exactly why I offered you this position, she said. In 30 minutes, you've reframed a client crisis in ways that our team hadn't considered, despite working on it for 3 days. That's not about experience or training. That's about perspective. It's about understanding what it feels like when systems don't work the way they're supposed to, Matthias replied. When you've depended on promises that other people couldn't keep, you develop empathy for both sides of operational failures. David? Evangeline called as he finished his phone conversation. How did they respond? They want to implement the revised strategy immediately, David reported with obvious excitement. And they want Matthias to lead the customer communication component of the project. They said his approach demonstrates understanding of their brand values in ways that our previous recommendations hadn't captured. Matthias felt a surge of professional validation mixed with nervous anticipation. The client response suggested his insights had real value, but it also meant taking responsibility for outcomes that would affect a major retailer's holiday performance. Is that something you'd be interested in? Evangeline asked, leading a client project as part of your interview process. You're offering me a trial run at the actual job, Matthias asked, wanting to clarify the arrangement. I'm offering you a chance to see if this work energizes you the way I think it will, Evangeline replied. And we're giving ourselves an opportunity to observe how you handle client relationships under real pressure. The proposal felt both exciting and terrifying. Success would likely secure the job offer and establish his credibility with both colleagues and clients. Failure would prove that his insights were theoretical rather than practical, ending the opportunity before it truly began. What about timing? This sounds like it would require immediate attention, and I have commitments with Ride Connect that I can't just abandon. We'd bring you on as a consulting contractor for this specific project, David suggested. 48 hours of intensive client work, with full pay regardless of whether you decide to accept the permanent position afterward. Matthias calculated quickly. 48 hours of consulting fees would probably equal 2 weeks of Ride Connect income, while giving him genuine insight into whether this career transition made sense for both him and Jasper. And if the project doesn't go well, then we both learn something valuable about fit and expectations, Evangeline said simply. But Matthias, your instincts about the Meridian situation were exactly what they needed to hear. I don't think you're going to struggle with this kind of work. That evening, Matthias explained the opportunity to Jasper over dinner at their small kitchen table. His son listened with the focused attention he brought to important conversations, asking clarifying questions about timelines and what the work would involve. So you'd be helping stores make sure people get their Christmas presents on time, Jasper summarized. Something like that. I'd be helping them solve problems and communicate with their customers honestly when things don't go according to plan. That sounds like something you'd be good at, Jasper observed. You always tell me the truth about things, even when it's complicated. The simple assessment struck Matthias as perhaps the most accurate evaluation of his professional strengths he'd ever heard. His willingness to acknowledge complexity, rather than offering false reassurance, had been essential to maintaining trust with Jasper during their most difficult periods. Perhaps that same authenticity could be valuable in business consulting. Are you okay with me being extra busy for the next few days while I work on this project? Matthias asked. Will it help us not worry about money so much? If it goes well, yes, it could change things significantly for both of us. Jasper nodded with the adaptability that continued to amaze Matthias. Then I think you should try it. And Dad, if it doesn't work out, we'll figure out something else. We always do. As Matthias prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how dramatically his life had shifted in the week since picking up Evangeline outside the Grandview Plaza Hotel. The conversation that had begun as a routine Ride Connect fare had evolved into an opportunity that could redefine his professional identity and financial security. Tomorrow, he would discover whether his insights about business challenges were as valuable in practice as they had appeared in theory. But regardless of the outcome, he was grateful for the reminder that authentic human connection could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances, opening doors to possibilities he'd never imagined pursuing. The Meridian retail headquarters in Boulder felt like stepping into a different universe from anything Matthias had experienced in his previous career. The building's modern architecture featured glass walls and open-concept spaces designed to foster collaboration, while digital displays throughout the lobby showcased real-time sales data and customer engagement metrics that made his former shipping warehouse look primitive by comparison. Mr. Blackwood? A young woman in a sharp business suit approached him with the kind of confident energy that marked her as someone accustomed to managing high-stakes situations. I'm Rachel Morrison, Meridian's Director of Operations. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Matthias adjusted his tie, a new purchase that had cost him $40 he couldn't really afford but that seemed necessary for client-facing work, and tried to project the professional confidence he wasn't entirely sure he possessed. Thank you for the opportunity. I understand you're facing some significant challenges with your holiday logistics. Rachel's expression grew more serious as she led him through the building toward the executive conference room. That's putting it mildly. We have $3 million worth of inventory sitting in containers that should have been delivered to our distribution centers 2 weeks ago. Our marketing team has been promising customers specific delivery dates that we now can't meet, and our customer service team is fielding hundreds of complaints daily. As they walked, Matthias noticed the tension in the office atmosphere. Employees clustered around computer screens with expressions of barely controlled panic. Phones rang constantly, with what sounded like urgent conversations, and the energy felt chaotic rather than productively busy. He recognized the signs of an organization under severe stress, where normal problem-solving had been replaced by crisis management. The Thorne strategic team has been working on routing solutions, Rachel continued. But honestly, we're past the point where logistics optimization alone can save us. We need damage control, and we need it fast. The conference room was dominated by a massive table covered with shipping manifests, customer complaints printed from email systems, and multiple laptops displaying spreadsheets that tracked various aspects of their crisis. David Chen was already present, looking tired but focused, as he reviewed what appeared to be revised shipping schedules. Matthias, David said, looking up with obvious relief, perfect timing. We've made progress on the routing issues, but the client communication strategy is becoming more complex than we anticipated. A man in his 50s entered the room with the kind of hurried energy that suggested someone accustomed to solving problems through sheer force of will. His expensive suit and confident bearing marked him as senior leadership, but the stress lines around his eyes suggested someone operating beyond his normal comfort zone. "This must be our consultant from Thorne Strategic," the man said, extending his hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. "I'm Robert Chen, no relation to David, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Retail. I understand you have some unconventional ideas about how to handle our situation." Matthias felt the weight of expectations settling around him like a heavy coat. Everything about this environment, the corporate setting, the financial stakes, the executive attention, was new territory for someone whose recent professional experience had involved driving strangers around the city and organizing warehouse shipments. "I've been reviewing your customer communication challenges," Matthias began, grateful that he'd spent the previous evening studying their website, social media presence, and recent customer service interactions. The conventional approach would be to minimize disclosure about delays while working frantically to solve them behind the scenes. "Exactly what our legal team has been recommending," Robert confirmed. "Admit nothing, promise nothing we can't guarantee, and hope we can fix everything before customers notice the problems." "But that approach assumes your customers are passive recipients of your decisions rather than people who can become allies if you treat them with respect," Matthias replied, warming to his theme as he thought about his own experiences as a consumer dealing with companies during crisis situations. "Your customers have already made emotional investments in specific purchases. Instead of hoping they won't notice problems, you can acknowledge difficulties while demonstrating that you value their business enough to make extraordinary efforts to resolve issues." Rachel pulled out a tablet showing their customer service dashboard. "We're currently receiving about 300 complaint calls per day, with average wait times of 45 minutes. Our standard response has been to apologize for delays without providing specific information about revised timelines." "Which probably frustrates customers more than the original delays," Matthias observed. "People can handle disappointment if they understand what's happening and believe you're working to fix it. They can't handle feeling ignored or lied to." David opened his laptop and displayed a map showing their shipping bottlenecks. "We've identified solutions for about 60% of the delayed inventory. The remaining 40% will be delayed by an additional 2 to 3 weeks beyond the original delivery dates." "So we're looking at 2 different customer communication strategies," Matthias said, beginning to see the framework for their approach. "For the 60%, we can provide specific, updated timelines with confidence. For the 40%, we need to offer alternatives that might actually be more valuable than the original delivery schedule." "More valuable how?" Robert asked, his skepticism obvious. Matthias walked to the whiteboard and began sketching a timeline that included both logistics solutions and customer engagement opportunities. What if the delayed deliveries became opportunities to provide white-glove service that exceeds normal expectations? Personal delivery, gift wrapping, maybe even small bonus items that acknowledge the inconvenience while demonstrating your commitment to customer satisfaction. "That would increase our costs significantly," Rachel observed. "But it would also differentiate your company from competitors who handle delays through standard apologies and discount codes," Matthias replied. "Your customers would remember how you handled their problems, not just that problems occurred." Robert was studying the whiteboard with the focused attention of someone evaluating a potentially significant strategic shift. "You're suggesting we turn a logistics crisis into a customer service opportunity." "I'm suggesting you acknowledge that customer relationships matter more than perfect operational efficiency," Matthias said. "Your customers will forgive delays if they believe you care about their experience as individuals rather than just viewing them as transaction data." The conversation was interrupted by Robert's phone, which buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent text message. He frowned as he read the screen, then looked up at the group with obvious concern. "Our social media manager just reported that complaints about delayed orders are starting to trend on Twitter. We're approaching a public relations crisis in addition to our operational challenges." Rachel immediately pulled out her own phone, presumably to check the social media situation. "If this goes viral, we could be looking at brand damage that extends far beyond the immediate shipping delays." "Or we could get ahead of it," Matthias suggested, feeling the adrenaline that came with real-time problem-solving under pressure. Instead of waiting for complaints to define the narrative, you could proactively communicate your solution strategy. Show customers that you're not hiding from problems, but actively working to turn difficulties into opportunities for better service. "You want us to publicize our logistics failures?" Robert asked, his tone suggesting this was either brilliant or insane. "I want you to publicize your customer service excellence," Matthias clarified. "The delays are already public. People are talking about them whether you participate in the conversation or not. But you can control whether the narrative becomes Meridian Retail failed to deliver or Meridian Retail went above and beyond to make things right when shipping partners let everyone down." David was taking notes rapidly, his expression suggesting he was beginning to see the broader implications of Matthias's approach. This would require coordination between operations, customer service, marketing, and social media teams. We'd essentially be implementing a company-wide crisis response strategy in real time. Which is exactly what companies with strong customer loyalty do when faced with operational challenges, Matthias replied. They treat crisis situations as opportunities to demonstrate their values rather than problems to be hidden. Rachel looked up from her phone with an expression of determined optimism. The social media complaints are still manageable, maybe 20 or 30 posts that haven't gained significant traction yet. If we move quickly, we could shape the conversation before it becomes a major issue. "What would you need from us to implement this approach?" Robert asked, his tone suggesting he was seriously considering a strategy that probably violated conventional corporate crisis management protocols. Matthias felt the weight of professional responsibility settling on his shoulders. These executives were prepared to implement recommendations that would affect millions of dollars in revenue and thousands of customer relationships. His insights needed to translate into actionable plans that would work in practice, not just theory. First, transparent communication about what happened and what you're doing to fix it. He began, organizing his thoughts into concrete steps. Second, specific alternatives for customers whose orders will be significantly delayed. Third, a social media strategy that positions your response as industry-leading customer service rather than damage control. And if it doesn't work? Robert asked directly. If customers respond negatively to transparency about operational problems, then you'll have learned something valuable about your customer base while demonstrating integrity during a difficult situation, Matthias replied. But in my experience, people respond positively to honesty, combined with genuine efforts to make things right. As the meeting concluded with assignments for implementing the revised customer communication strategy, Matthias realized he had just committed to an approach that would be tested publicly within days. The corporate environment that had felt intimidating that morning now felt energizing, like a place where his insights could have immediate impact on real business outcomes. Driving home that evening, Matthias reflected on how dramatically his professional identity had shifted in a single day. 6 hours ago, he had been a Ride Connect driver with logistics experience hoping to impress corporate executives. Now he was a consultant whose recommendations would influence how a major retailer handled one of their biggest operational crises. The transformation felt both exhilarating and terrifying, but most importantly, it felt authentic to his skills and values, in ways that gave him confidence about the path he was choosing. The success of the Meridian Retail Crisis Management had exceeded everyone's expectations, including Matthias's own. 3 weeks after implementing the transparent communication strategy, the company's customer satisfaction scores had actually improved compared to pre-crisis levels. Social media sentiment had shifted from complaints about delays to praise for exceptional customer service, and Robert Chen had personally called Evangeline to request that Matthias be assigned to their account permanently. "I've never seen anything like it," David said as he and Matthias reviewed the post-crisis analytics in Thorne Strategic's conference room. Customers are posting about feeling genuinely cared for rather than just processed through corporate systems. Some are saying they'll specifically choose Meridian for future purchases because of how the company handled difficulties. Matthias studied the customer feedback displayed on David's laptop, still somewhat amazed that his instincts about honest communication had translated into measurable business results. The comments weren't just positive, they were enthusiastic, with customers sharing stories about personalized service and unexpected gestures that had transformed disappointing delivery delays into memorable experiences. What surprised me most was how quickly the customer service team adapted to the new approach, Matthias replied. Once they were given permission to acknowledge problems and offer real solutions, they seemed relieved to finally be honest with customers instead of reading scripted apologies. That's the human element you keep talking about, David observed. The customer service representatives were probably as frustrated by the old approach as the customers were. Everyone benefited from treating the situation like a relationship problem rather than just a logistics issue. Evangeline entered the conference room carrying coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose instincts about personnel decisions had been thoroughly validated. Over the past 3 weeks, she had been carefully observing Matthias's integration into the company culture, noting how quickly he had developed rapport with both colleagues and clients. "Matthias, I just got off the phone with Rachel Morrison," Evangeline announced. "Meridian wants to expand their engagement with us to include a comprehensive review of their customer experience protocols. They specifically requested that you lead the project." Matthias paused, processing the implications. "That's a significant expansion from crisis management to ongoing strategic consulting." "It's also a vote of confidence in your approach," David added. "They're essentially asking us to help them restructure their entire customer relationship philosophy based on what they learned during the shipping crisis." The opportunity felt both exciting and overwhelming. 3 weeks ago, Matthias had been driving Ride Connect passengers to pay rent. Now he was being asked to help redesign customer experience strategies for a company with annual revenues in the hundreds of millions. "There's something else," Evangeline continued, settling into her chair with an expression that suggested important news. "I've been reviewing our client feedback across all accounts, and a pattern has emerged. Projects that include your involvement consistently receive higher satisfaction ratings than our traditional consulting engagements." "What kind of pattern?" Matthias asked, genuinely curious about the data behind her observation. Evangeline opened a folder containing what appeared to be comprehensive client evaluation reports. Clients specifically mentioned feeling understood and valued as individuals rather than treated as generic business problems. They appreciate recommendations that acknowledge both operational efficiency and human impact. "That makes sense," Matthias replied thoughtfully. "Most business challenges involve people making decisions under pressure. If you only address the technical aspects without considering the emotional and social factors, your solutions often fail during implementation." "Exactly. And that insight is worth more than any advanced degree or traditional consulting experience." Evangeline pulled out a formal document that looked like a contract. "Which brings me to the real reason for this meeting. I'd like to offer you a permanent position as Senior Consultant for Client Relations, with a starting salary of $85,000 annually, plus performance bonuses based on client satisfaction metrics." Matthias felt his heart rate accelerate as he processed the offer. The salary was higher than what they'd originally discussed, and the performance bonus structure suggested Evangeline was betting on his continued success with client relationships. "What would this position involve beyond the Meridian account?" he asked, trying to maintain professional composure while internally celebrating the financial security this opportunity represented. "Leading client engagements that require relationship building alongside technical analysis," David explained. "Companies that are struggling with change management, employee morale issues that affect operational efficiency, or customer loyalty challenges that go beyond standard marketing approaches. Essentially, you'd be our specialist for situations where human factors are as important as business metrics," Evangeline added. "We've discovered that many of our clients' problems stem from communication breakdowns or cultural issues that traditional consulting approaches don't address effectively." Matthias thought about Jasper, probably finishing his homework at their apartment while Mrs. Patterson supervised. The job offer would mean consistent schedules, elimination of financial stress, and most importantly, the kind of professional fulfillment he'd thought was permanently beyond his reach after losing his logistics position. "I'm very interested," he said carefully, "but I need to understand something. This feels like a significant investment in someone with relatively limited consulting experience. What happens if client satisfaction doesn't continue at current levels?" "Then we adjust your role based on what we learn," Evangeline replied simply. "But Matthias, client satisfaction isn't luck or beginner's advantage. It's the result of genuine empathy combined with business intelligence. That combination is rare in our industry, and I don't expect it to diminish with experience." That evening, Matthias took Jasper to their favorite pizza restaurant to celebrate what felt like the most significant professional milestone of his adult life. The restaurant was modest, nothing like the corporate dining venues he'd become accustomed to during client meetings. But the casual atmosphere allowed for the kind of honest conversation that had always characterized their father-son relationship. "So this means no more Ride Connect driving?" Jasper asked as he carefully arranged his pizza toppings into geometric patterns, a habit that still made Matthias smile. "No more late-night driving shifts," Matthias confirmed. "I'll have regular business hours, which means I'll be home for dinner and homework time every night." "And we don't have to worry about rent money anymore?" "We don't have to worry about rent money anymore," Matthias agreed, feeling deep satisfaction at being able to provide his son with the security that had been missing from their lives for months. Jasper considered this information with the seriousness he brought to important topics. "Will you still be the same dad, or will you become a different person because you have a fancy job now?" The question was perceptive in the way that children's observations often were, cutting through adult complexities to identify the core concern. Matthias had been wondering about this himself, whether professional success would change his values or his relationship with Jasper. "I'll always be your dad first," Matthias said, meaning it completely. "The job is important because it lets me take better care of you, but it doesn't change who we are or what matters most to us." "Good," Jasper replied with obvious relief, "because I like having a dad who understands when things are hard for people. That's probably why you're good at your new job." As they finished dinner and walked home through their neighborhood, Matthias reflected on how dramatically their circumstances had changed while their fundamental relationship remained constant. Jasper's acceptance of their improved situation was characteristically pragmatic. He was happy about the stability without being overwhelmed by the implications. "Dad," Jasper said as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, "are you going to call Evangeline to tell her you want the job?" "I think I am," Matthias replied. "Do you think that's a good decision?" "I think you should take jobs that make you excited to go to work," Jasper said with 7-year-old wisdom. "And you've been excited about work every day since you started helping that company with their shipping problems." That night, after Jasper was asleep, Matthias sat at his kitchen table with Evangeline's contract and a pen, trying to fully comprehend the transformation that had occurred in his life over the past month. The job offer represented more than financial security. It was validation that his life experiences had value in professional settings, that his insights about human behavior could translate into business success. He thought about the Ride Connect passengers he'd driven over the past 8 months, the diverse range of people whose stories had taught him about resilience, ambition, disappointment, and hope. Those conversations had been his real education in understanding how people navigated challenges, and now that education was becoming the foundation for a career he'd never imagined pursuing. As he signed the contract, Matthias realized that accepting Evangeline's offer felt less like taking a new job and more like stepping into a professional identity that aligned with his natural strengths and personal values. The work energized him because it required both analytical thinking and genuine care for other people's success, a combination that felt authentic to who he'd always been, even when circumstances had forced him into survival mode. The next morning, Matthias dropped Jasper at school and drove directly to the Thorne strategic offices, where he would begin his first official day as senior consultant for client relations. The building looked the same as it had during his initial visit, but his relationship to the space had fundamentally changed. He was no longer an outsider hoping to prove his worth. He was a valued team member whose perspectives were specifically sought for their unique contribution to client success. Walking through the lobby toward the elevator, Matthias felt grateful for the late-night Ride Connect fare that had introduced him to Evangeline Thorne and changed the trajectory of both their lives. Sometimes, the most important opportunities emerged from the most ordinary circumstances, proving that authentic human connection could create possibilities that no amount of strategic planning could anticipate. 6 months into his tenure at Thorne Strategic Solutions, Matthias had established himself as the company's most requested consultant for high-stakes client relationships. His office, once a modest space overlooking the parking garage, had been upgraded to a corner suite with mountain views and enough room for the collaborative client meetings that had become his specialty. But success hadn't changed his approach. If anything, it had reinforced his belief that authentic human connection was the foundation of sustainable business solutions. "The Westfield manufacturing engagement is ready for your review," announced Sarah Kim, the project coordinator who had been assigned to manage Matthias's increasingly complex client portfolio. She entered his office carrying a thick folder of research and analysis that represented 3 weeks of intensive preparation for what could become Thorne Strategic's largest contract to date. Westfield Manufacturing was a century-old family business facing an existential crisis. The third-generation owner, Patricia Westfield, had inherited a company struggling to compete with overseas manufacturers while maintaining the quality standards and employee relationships that had defined their brand for decades. Their operational efficiency was declining, Employee morale was at historic lows, and major clients were threatening to switch to cheaper suppliers. "What's your initial assessment?" Matthias asked as he reviewed the preliminary analysis. The data painted a picture of a company caught between preserving tradition and embracing necessary change, a challenge that required both operational restructuring and careful attention to human factors. Classic case of a company that's successful because of strong relationships, but struggling because those same relationships resist adaptation, Sarah replied. The employees are loyal and skilled, but they're also resistant to process changes that might improve efficiency. Management wants to preserve company culture while cutting costs, which creates internal tensions that affect productivity. Matthias nodded, recognizing the pattern from previous engagements. Companies that prioritized relationships often struggled with change management because alterations to familiar systems felt like betrayals of trust rather than necessary improvements. "What's Patricia Westfield's biggest fear?" he asked, applying the analytical approach that had become his signature method for understanding client challenges. "Losing the company culture that her grandfather built," Sarah said immediately, "but also losing the business entirely if they can't compete on pricing and delivery timelines." "And what's her real fear? The one she hasn't articulated because it feels too personal or too vulnerable?" Sarah paused, considering the question with the careful attention that Matthias's team had learned to bring to psychological aspects of business analysis. "That she's not worthy of her inheritance. That she'll be remembered as the generation that destroyed something beautiful that previous generations built through hard work and sacrifice." "Exactly. So our consulting approach needs to address both the operational challenges and the emotional weight of stewardship." Matthias walked to his whiteboard and began sketching a framework that included traditional efficiency metrics alongside relationship preservation strategies. "We're not just optimizing manufacturing processes, we're helping her become the kind of leader who honors the past while building a sustainable future." The Westfield manufacturing facility was located in Golden, Colorado, a 40-minute drive from Denver that took Matthias through mountain foothills and small towns that reminded him of the working-class communities where he'd grown up. The factory itself was impressive, a sprawling complex of brick buildings and modern additions that showed a century of gradual expansion and technological advancement. Patricia Westfield met him at the main entrance with the kind of tired professionalism that suggested someone operating under enormous pressure. She was perhaps 55, with gray-streaked hair and calloused hands that indicated someone who understood manufacturing work from direct experience rather than just management theory. "Mr. Blackwood, thank you for coming. I hope you can help us figure out how to stay competitive without destroying everything my family has built here." Her directness was refreshing after months of corporate meetings where important topics were often discussed through layers of diplomatic language. "I'm here to understand what makes Westfield manufacturing special and how we can preserve those qualities while improving your competitive position," Matthias replied as they walked through the facility. "Success doesn't have to mean abandoning your values. Sometimes it means finding better ways to express them." The factory tour revealed both the company's strengths and its challenges. The employees clearly took pride in their work, demonstrating craftsmanship and attention to detail that justified Westfield's reputation for quality. But the production processes showed signs of inefficiency that more modern manufacturers had eliminated through automation and streamlined workflows. "This is our main assembly line," Patricia explained as they watched workers carefully fitting components together with the kind of manual precision that machines could replicate faster and cheaper. "Every piece is inspected 3 times before it leaves this station. It's slower than automated assembly, but the quality is consistently superior." "What would happen if you maintained the same quality standards but restructured the workflow to eliminate redundant inspection steps?" Matthias asked, already seeing possibilities for improvement that wouldn't require sacrificing craftsmanship. "Our quality control manager would probably quit," Patricia replied with a rueful smile. "He's been here 37 years and takes personal responsibility for every defect that reaches customers. The idea of reducing inspection protocols feels like professional betrayal to him." Matthias made notes about the human factors that complicated operational changes. The resistance to efficiency improvements wasn't just about preserving jobs. It was about preserving professional identity and personal pride in work quality. "Could we design a pilot program that actually enhances his role rather than diminishing it?" Matthias suggested. "Instead of reducing inspection, we could make him responsible for training workers in advanced quality control techniques that prevent defects during assembly rather than catching them afterward." Patricia's expression shifted from resignation to interest. That would require him to teach his expertise to others instead of just applying it himself, which elevates his status from quality inspector to quality educator. His knowledge becomes more valuable, not less, and the workers gain skills that make them more invested in producing excellent work. Matthias was warming to the concept, as he saw how it could address both efficiency goals and employee satisfaction. Everyone benefits from improved outcomes, but no one feels like their contribution is being devalued. As they continued through the facility, Matthias applied the same analytical approach to other operational challenges. Instead of recommending standard efficiency improvements that would disrupt established relationships, he identified ways to achieve better results through enhanced collaboration and skill development. "Your employees aren't obstacles to efficiency," he explained as they concluded the tour in Patricia's office. "They're underutilized assets whose knowledge and commitment could drive improvements that automated systems can't achieve. But how do we convince them to embrace changes when they've learned to be suspicious of management initiatives that promise benefits but usually result in job losses or increased workload?" Matthias thought about his own experience with corporate restructuring, the fear and uncertainty that accompanied announcements of optimization and right-sizing. The key was demonstrating that changes would enhance rather than threaten the things employees valued most about their work. By involving them in designing the improvements rather than just implementing changes that management develops in isolation, he replied, "Your workers understand the production process better than any outside consultant. If you ask them to identify problems and propose solutions, they'll create improvements they're invested in implementing successfully." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Matthias with the kind of careful attention that business owners applied to decisions that could determine their company's survival. "That's the opposite of what our previous consultants recommended. They suggested streamlining management decision-making by reducing employee input on operational changes." And how did that approach work out? Increased resistance, decreased morale, and efficiency improvements that looked good on paper but failed during implementation because workers found ways to undermine changes they hadn't been consulted about. Patricia's frustration was evident as she described the failed initiatives that had preceded Matthias's engagement. "People support what they help create," Matthias observed. "If your employees design the efficiency improvements, they become advocates for success rather than obstacles to change." Over the following weeks, Matthias worked with Patricia and her management team to develop what they called the Westfield Excellence Initiative, a comprehensive program that positioned operational improvements as employee empowerment rather than corporate cost-cutting. Workers were organized into cross-functional teams tasked with identifying inefficiencies and proposing solutions that would maintain quality while improving productivity. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Employees who had been resistant to management-imposed changes became enthusiastic advocates for improvements they had designed themselves. The quality control manager became a celebrated trainer whose expertise was valued more highly than ever. Production efficiency increased by 30% while customer satisfaction scores actually improved due to better communication between assembly teams and quality assurance staff. "I've never seen anything like it," Patricia told Matthias during their final project review meeting. "Our workers are more engaged than they've been in years. Our efficiency metrics are the best in company history, and our major clients are increasing their orders because they've noticed improvements in both quality and delivery times." "What made the difference wasn't the specific changes you implemented," Matthias replied. "It was treating your employees as partners in problem-solving rather than obstacles to overcome. Their knowledge and commitment were always there. They just needed to be recognized and utilized effectively." The Westfield manufacturing success story became a showcase for Thorne Strategic's relationship-based consulting approach. Other family businesses facing similar challenges began requesting specifically for Matthias to lead their engagements, recognizing that his methods could achieve operational improvements without sacrificing the human elements that made their company special. "You've essentially created a new category of business consulting," David observed as they reviewed the client feedback from the Westfield engagement. "Efficiency optimization that strengthens rather than undermines company culture." "It's not a new category," Matthias replied thoughtfully. "It's just remembering that businesses are made up of people, and people perform better when they feel valued and respected rather than just managed and measured." As Matthias prepared for his next client engagement, a regional hospital system struggling with staff retention and patient satisfaction, he reflected on how his professional approach had been shaped by his own experiences with economic uncertainty and workplace displacement. The empathy that came from understanding what it felt like to have your livelihood threatened by forces beyond your control had become his greatest asset in helping organizations navigate change while preserving the human relationships that made work meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on him that his success as a business consultant stemmed from the same qualities that had made him effective as a Ride Connect driver: the ability to listen carefully, understand different perspectives, and find solutions that served everyone's interests, rather than just optimizing metrics that looked good in corporate reports. The discovery happened by accident, which somehow made it feel more devastating than if Matthias had been actively searching for the truth. He was working late on a Friday evening preparing client presentations for the following week when his computer crashed while accessing the company's shared server. IT had installed a backup system that automatically redirected him to archived files, and as he navigated through unfamiliar folders looking for his documents, he stumbled across a directory labeled Executive Strategic Planning, Confidential. Professional ethics should have made him close the folder immediately, but something about the timeline of the files caught his attention. Several documents were dated from the weeks before his initial encounter with Evangeline, with file names that included references to workforce diversification initiatives and targeted recruitment protocols. Curiosity overcame discretion, and Matthias opened the first document. What he found made his blood run cold. The file contained a comprehensive demographic analysis of Denver's gig economy workers, with specific focus on high-potential individuals experiencing temporary economic displacement. The report identified Ride Connect drivers as a particularly valuable recruitment target because they combine customer service experience with self-motivation and schedule flexibility. But it was the next document that shattered everything Matthias thought he knew about his relationship with Evangeline. A detailed psychological profile, complete with photographs taken from social media accounts, described his personal and professional background with clinical precision. The analysis included information about his previous job loss, his financial struggles, his parenting style with Jasper, and even his late-night driving patterns. Target subject: Matthias Blackwood. The report began. Single father, age 31, demonstrates exceptional problem-solving skills and emotional intelligence based on employment history and customer service ratings. Economic vulnerability combined with strong work ethics suggests high receptivity to alternative employment opportunities. Psychological assessment indicates subject prioritizes stability and meaningful work over maximum compensation, making him ideal candidate for relationship-based consulting role. Matthias felt sick as he continued reading. The document outlined a, quote, natural encounter scenario designed to create the impression of spontaneous opportunity while actually representing a carefully orchestrated recruitment strategy. Evangeline's late-night pickup request had been deliberately scheduled after detailed surveillance confirmed his typical driving routes and passenger demographics. Even their conversation had been scripted. The report included suggested talking points for establishing empathy and trust with economically displaced professionals and identifying personal motivations that can be leveraged for recruitment purposes. Evangeline had known about Jasper, about his financial stress, about his background in logistics coordination before she ever stepped into his car. The worst part was a section titled Emotional Leverage Assessment that analyzed how his dedication to providing for Jasper could be used to ensure his commitment to the job opportunity. The clinical language reduced his love for his son to a motivational pressure point that could be, quote, activated to secure subject compliance with corporate objectives. Matthias stared at the screen, trying to process the implications of what he was reading. Everything he'd believed about his professional success, the authentic connection with Evangeline, the recognition of his unique insights, the validation of his life experiences, had been built on elaborate deception. He wasn't a consultant who had earned respect through demonstrated competence. He was a target who had been psychologically manipulated into fulfilling a predetermined role. His hands shook as he opened additional files, finding surveillance reports that documented his daily routines, financial records that had been obtained through sources he couldn't identify, and even photographs of Jasper taken during school pickup times. The invasion of privacy felt like a violation that extended far beyond professional manipulation into something personally predatory. One folder contained video files labeled with dates and times that corresponded to his Ride Connect shifts. Matthias clicked on a file dated 3 days before his encounter with Evangeline and watched security camera footage of himself helping an elderly passenger with her groceries, accepting no payment beyond the standard fare despite her offers of additional compensation. Another video showed him returning a forgotten phone to a drunk college student, waiting 15 minutes to ensure the kid got safely inside his apartment building. The footage had been compiled to demonstrate his altruistic behavioral patterns and reliability under unsupervised conditions. His kindness had been studied and cataloged like data points in a corporate acquisition strategy. Every moment of genuine human decency had been analyzed for its utility in predicting his suitability for manipulation. A final document titled Implementation Timeline outlined how Evangeline would gradually build trust and dependency through increasing professional opportunities and personal validation. The strategy included specific benchmarks for emotional investment and commitment escalation that would make withdrawal from the arrangement psychologically difficult, even if deception was eventually discovered. The plan had worked perfectly. Matthias had indeed become emotionally invested in his relationship with Evangeline and professionally dependent on the opportunities she'd provided. The success he'd achieved, the financial security he'd built for Jasper, the professional identity he'd developed, all of it was founded on a lie so comprehensive that he didn't know which aspects of his experience had been authentic and which had been performance. His phone buzzed with a text message from Evangeline. "Great work on the Westfield project. Looking forward to discussing your next assignment on Monday. Hope you and Jasper have a wonderful weekend." The casual mention of his son's name, which had once felt like genuine interest in his family, now felt like a reminder of how thoroughly she had invaded every aspect of his private life. Did she actually care about Jasper's well-being, or was her attention just another element of the manipulation strategy? Matthias closed the files and sat in the darkened office, trying to reconcile the woman who had listened to his struggles with genuine empathy against the corporate executive who had orchestrated those struggles for strategic advantage. The conversation that had felt like the most authentic human connection he'd experienced in months had actually been the most elaborate deception of his adult life. The irony was devastating. His success at Thorne Strategic had been built on his ability to identify when clients' stated problems masked deeper emotional issues. He'd become expert at recognizing when businesses used efficiency concerns to avoid addressing relationship failures or communication breakdowns. But he'd completely missed the signs of manipulation in his own professional situation. Everything made sense now. Evangeline's uncanny ability to ask exactly the right questions during their initial conversation. Her immediate recognition of his analytical strengths despite having just met him. The job opportunity that perfectly matched his skills and addressed his specific financial needs. The company's sudden interest in relationship-based consulting that aligned exactly with his personal strengths. He'd been recruited like a chess piece being moved into position for a game he didn't know he was playing. The worst part wasn't the professional deception, it was the realization that his feelings of gratitude and loyalty toward Evangeline had been deliberately cultivated through psychological manipulation. Every moment of appreciation he'd felt for her recognition and support had been built on lies designed to ensure his emotional compliance with corporate objectives. Matthias gathered his things and left the office, feeling like his entire professional identity had been built on false foundations. The drive home through empty streets gave him time to think about the implications for both his career and his relationship with Jasper. How could he continue working for a company that had violated his privacy so thoroughly? But how could he abandon the financial security that had finally given his son the stability he deserved? When he arrived at their apartment, Jasper was asleep in his room, surrounded by homework assignments and art projects that represented the academic confidence he'd developed since their financial situation had stabilized. The sight of his son's peaceful sleep reminded Matthias of what was really at stake in whatever decision he made about responding to Evangeline's deception. That night, Matthias lay awake thinking about trust, authenticity, and the difference between earned success and manipulated achievement. By morning, he would need to decide whether to confront Evangeline about what he'd discovered, or simply resign from a position that had been offered under false pretenses. The job that had seemed like a miracle 6 months ago now felt like the most sophisticated fraud he'd ever encountered. But walking away would mean returning to financial uncertainty, just when Jasper needed stability most. The choice between his integrity and his son's security felt impossible to navigate, especially when both were being threatened by the same revelation of systematic deception. Monday morning arrived with a kind of crisp October air that usually energized Matthias for the week ahead, but today he felt like he was walking into battle. He'd spent the weekend rehearsing different approaches to confronting Evangeline, weighing the satisfaction of calling out her deception against the risk of losing everything he'd built for Jasper's future. By the time he reached the Thorn Strategic Building, he'd decided that honesty, even painful honesty, was the only way forward. Evangeline was already in her office when he arrived, reviewing what appeared to be client proposals while sipping coffee from the ceramic mug he'd given her as a thank you gift after the Meridian retail success. The sight of her using his gift while knowing about her systematic manipulation felt like salt in an open wound. "Matthias, perfect timing," she said, looking up with the warm smile that had once made him feel valued and appreciated. "I wanted to discuss the Morrison Industries opportunity. They're specifically requesting you for their culture transformation project." "Before we talk about new clients, I need to discuss something I discovered on Friday night," Matthias said, closing her office door behind him with deliberate finality. "Something that changes everything I thought I knew about my employment here." Evangeline's expression shifted subtly, the professional warmth replaced by careful attention that suggested she was processing potential complications. "What kind of discovery?" Matthias pulled out printed copies of the surveillance documents he'd found, placing them on her desk with the same methodical precision he'd learned to apply to client presentations. "A comprehensive psychological profile of my personal and professional background, completed weeks before our supposed chance encounter. Surveillance footage of my daily routines. Financial records that shouldn't have been accessible to anyone outside law enforcement. And a detailed recruitment strategy that treated my relationship with my son as a motivational pressure point to ensure compliance." The silence that followed felt heavy with the weight of revealed deception. Evangeline stared at the documents without touching them, her expression cycling through what appeared to be resignation, regret, and something that might have been relief. "How long have you known?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but not defensive. "Since Friday night, when my computer crashed and redirected me to archived files that contained a folder labeled Executive Strategic Planning Confidential." Matthias sat down across from her desk, maintaining eye contact despite the emotional difficulty of the conversation. "I spent the weekend trying to understand how someone could orchestrate such an elaborate deception while appearing to offer genuine opportunity and friendship." Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, looking out her office window at the Denver skyline as if gathering courage for a conversation she'd hoped to avoid. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability he'd never heard before. "The surveillance and psychological profiling were real," she admitted. "The strategic recruitment planning was real. Your encounter with me was orchestrated, not coincidental." She paused, seemingly struggling with how much honesty the situation required. "But Matthias, everything that happened after that first night, every conversation, every professional opportunity, every moment of recognition for your work, that was genuine." "How can I believe that?" Matthias asked, his voice containing hurt more than anger. "How can I separate authentic appreciation from strategic manipulation when you've been studying my psychological vulnerabilities since before we met?" "Because I fired the consulting firm that developed the recruitment strategy 3 days after hiring you," Evangeline replied, reaching into her desk drawer and pulling out what appeared to be a contract termination notice. "Because once I actually worked with you, I realized that their approach was not only unethical but completely unnecessary. Your skills and character were exactly what we needed, but the way we identified and recruited you was inexcusable." Matthias read the termination document, noting that it was dated just weeks after his hiring and included language about incompatible methodologies and, quote, ethical concerns regarding privacy violations. The timing suggested that Evangeline had ended the surveillance relationship relatively quickly, but it didn't erase the fundamental violation of trust that had initiated their professional relationship. "Why?" Matthias asked directly. "Why go to such elaborate lengths to recruit someone for a position you could have filled through normal hiring processes?" Evangeline stood and walked to her window, her posture suggesting someone preparing to reveal information she'd kept hidden for months. "Because 3 years ago, Thorn Strategic nearly failed due to client complaints about impersonal service and generic solutions. Our consultants were technically competent, but couldn't connect with clients on human levels. We were losing contracts to smaller firms whose consultants understood relationship dynamics alongside business metrics. So you decided to recruit someone from outside traditional consulting backgrounds." "I decided to recruit someone who understood what it felt like to struggle, who had developed empathy through personal experience rather than academic study. Someone whose insights about human behavior came from survival rather than theory." Evangeline turned back to face him, her expression carrying genuine remorse. The recruitment strategy was designed by consultants who treated hiring like a military operation rather than relationship building. I approved it because I was desperate to save the company, but I regretted it almost immediately. Matthias studied her face, looking for signs of continued manipulation or calculated emotional appeals. What he saw was exhaustion mixed with something that appeared to be genuine guilt about methods that had achieved desired results through ethically questionable means. The surveillance violated your privacy in ways that were completely unacceptable, Evangeline continued. But Matthias, your work performance, your client relationships, your professional development, none of that was manufactured or artificial. You succeeded because you're exceptionally good at what you do, not because of any ongoing manipulation. But how do I know that? Matthias asked, his voice containing the frustration of someone whose reality had been fundamentally undermined. How do I trust my own judgment about my professional abilities when I discovered them through a process built on lies? Because the clients validate your work independently, Evangeline replied. Meridian Retail, Westfield Manufacturing, Morrison Industries. They request you specifically because of outcomes you achieved through your own insights and efforts. The initial recruitment may have been deceptive, but your success has been earned through legitimate competence. Matthias walked to the whiteboard, where he'd sketched solutions for dozens of client challenges over the past months. Each diagram represented problems he'd solved through careful analysis and genuine understanding of human dynamics. The work felt authentic, but knowing it had originated through manipulation contaminated his sense of professional accomplishment. "What about your personal interest in my life?" he asked. "Your questions about Jasper, your apparent concern for our well-being, was that strategic engagement or genuine care?" "Both," Evangeline admitted, her honesty surprising him with its directness. "Initially, understanding your personal situation was part of ensuring job satisfaction and retention, but working with you, seeing how you balance professional responsibilities with single parenthood, watching your dedication to providing opportunities for Jasper, that admiration became completely genuine." "I don't know how to separate the authentic parts from the strategic ones," Matthias said, voicing the central dilemma that had kept him awake for 3 consecutive nights. "Every conversation we've had is contaminated by knowing that you studied my psychological profile before deciding how to approach me." "Then let me be completely transparent now," Evangeline said, returning to her chair and maintaining steady eye contact. "The recruitment process was unethical, and I take full responsibility for approving methods that violated your privacy. But Matthias, you've become more than an employee. You've become someone I respect professionally and care about personally. Losing you would impact the company's success, but it would also represent the loss of a relationship I value independently of business considerations." The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and complicated by the circumstances that had brought them to this point. Matthias felt the weight of decisions that would affect not just his own future, but Jasper's stability and Evangeline's professional success. "I need time to think about this," Matthias said finally. "About whether I can continue working for someone who orchestrated my recruitment through psychological manipulation, even if the ongoing relationship has been genuine." "I understand," Evangeline replied. "And Matthias, whatever you decide, I want you to know that discovering you through unethical means doesn't diminish your authentic value as a consultant or as a person. Your insights, your client relationships, your professional growth, all of that is real, regardless of how it began." As Matthias left her office, he felt the familiar complexity that had characterized every interaction with Evangeline since discovering the surveillance documents. She was simultaneously the person who had violated his privacy most thoroughly and the person who had provided him with opportunities that had transformed his life. The question that would determine his next steps wasn't whether Evangeline's methods had been wrong. They clearly had been. The question was whether the authentic relationship that had developed afterward was strong enough to rebuild trust from a foundation of acknowledged deception. Walking through the Thorne strategic offices, where he'd achieved the most meaningful professional success of his career, Matthias realized that his decision would ultimately depend on whether he could forgive someone who had manipulated him into a situation where forgiveness itself might be strategically advantageous. The resignation letter sat on Matthias's kitchen table for 3 days, unsigned but complete. He'd written it carefully, professionally, maintaining the courteous tone expected in business correspondence, while internally wrestling with emotions that ranged from betrayal to grief, over losing what had felt like the most meaningful work of his career. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as Senior Consultant for Client Relations at Thorn Strategic Solutions, the letter read. While I appreciate the professional opportunities provided during my employment, recent developments have made it impossible for me to continue in this role with the integrity that both the company and its clients deserve. The words felt inadequate to capture the complexity of his situation, the professional fulfillment he was abandoning, the financial security he was sacrificing, the personal relationships that had become tangled with corporate deception. But signing the letter felt like the only way to reclaim his sense of self-respect, after discovering that his entire career transformation had been built on manipulation. Jasper had been unusually quiet since Matthias had tried to explain why they might need to make some changes to their living situation. The boy's questions had been direct and heartbreaking. Did you do something wrong at work? Are we going to be poor again? Will I have to change schools? You didn't do anything wrong, Matthias had assured him. Sometimes adults have disagreements about the right way to do things. And sometimes those disagreements mean making difficult choices. But you like your job, Jasper had observed, with the clarity that made conversations with children both wonderful and challenging. You smile when you talk about helping companies solve problems. Why would you stop doing something that makes you happy? The question had cut to the heart of Matthias's internal conflict. He did love the work. The intellectual challenge of understanding complex business relationships, the satisfaction of helping organizations improve while preserving their human elements, the recognition that his insights had genuine value in professional settings. Walking away would mean losing more than income. It would mean abandoning a professional identity that felt authentic to his skills and values. But how could he continue working for someone who had studied his psychological vulnerabilities like a lab specimen? How could he trust his own judgment about client relationships when his most important professional relationship had originated through elaborate deception? On Thursday afternoon, as Matthias sat in his office reviewing client files and preparing transition documents for whoever would inherit his accounts, David Chen knocked on his door with an expression of obvious concern. "We need to talk," David said, settling into the chair across from Matthias's desk. "The Morrison Industries project has hit a crisis, and they're specifically requesting your immediate involvement." Matthias looked up from the resignation letter he'd been editing for the final time. What kind of crisis? Employee walkout. 57 workers left their shifts yesterday after management announced efficiency improvements without consulting the union representatives. Production has stopped completely, and the local media is characterizing it as a labor dispute that could spread to other facilities. The situation sounded exactly like the kind of challenge that had become Matthias's specialty, operational changes that failed because they ignored human factors and relationship dynamics. Morrison Industries was a manufacturing company similar to Westfield, but larger and more traditional in their management approach. What did management do wrong? Matthias asked, despite his intention to avoid new client engagements. Classic top-down efficiency implementation. They announced production line restructuring, new quality control protocols, and revised break schedules without involving workers in the planning process. The changes might improve productivity, but employees feel like they're being treated as obstacles rather than partners. Matthias could visualize the problem clearly, well-intentioned improvements that felt like attacks on worker autonomy and job security. The solution would require rebuilding trust, while demonstrating that efficiency goals could coexist with employee respect and involvement. They need someone who understands how to frame operational changes as empowerment rather than management control, Matthias said, recognizing his own analytical approach in the challenge description. They need you, David replied directly. The company's CEO flew in from Chicago specifically to request your involvement. They've heard about your work with Westfield Manufacturing, and they want the same relationship-based approach to resolving their crisis. David, I can't take on new projects right now. There are some personal complications with my employment here that make long-term commitments impossible. David's expression grew more serious as he processed Matthias's words. Are you leaving the company? The direct question forced Matthias to confront the reality he'd been avoiding through document preparation and transition planning. I'm considering it. There have been some developments that make me question whether I can continue working here with integrity. Does this have to do with the recruitment methods Evangeline used to hire you? Matthias stared at David, surprised by the question's specificity. You know about the surveillance and psychological profiling? I know that Evangeline used an outside consulting firm to identify and recruit you through methods that were ethically questionable, David replied carefully. I also know that she terminated that firm's contract almost immediately after realizing how invasive their approach had been. And you're okay with working for someone who would approve such methods? David was quiet for a moment, considering his response with the thoughtfulness that made him an effective operations director. I'm okay working for someone who recognized her mistake and took concrete steps to correct it. Evangeline told me about the recruitment strategy because she wanted my input on preventing similar ethical lapses in the future. But the violation of privacy, the manipulation of personal vulnerabilities, that doesn't concern you? It concerns me deeply, David said. But so does throwing away a professional relationship that has produced exceptional results for both the company and the clients you've served. Matthias, your work has helped real people solve real problems. Walking away because of how the opportunity originated seems like letting Evangeline's initial mistake damage outcomes that have been genuinely positive. The perspective was one Matthias hadn't fully considered, that his resignation might punish clients and employees who had benefited from his work more than it would address the ethical issues surrounding his recruitment. What about Morrison Industries? David continued. They're facing a crisis that your approach could resolve, but only if you're willing to set aside personal concerns about corporate politics to focus on helping people who need effective solutions. Matthias thought about the 57 workers who had walked off their jobs, probably feeling unheard and disrespected by management decisions that affected their daily work lives. He thought about the company executives who were likely panicking about production delays and media attention while missing the human factors that had created the crisis. If I agreed to help with Morrison Industries, it would be as a freelance consultant, not as a Thorne strategic employee, Matthias said slowly. I can't continue working for Evangeline while I'm still processing the trust issues, but I might be able to help resolve a specific crisis on independent terms. That could work, David replied, though his expression suggested this wasn't his preferred solution. Morrison Industries needs someone who understands their situation, regardless of which consulting firm provides the service. That evening, Matthias explained the Morrison Industries opportunity to Jasper over dinner at their kitchen table. His son listened with the focused attention he brought to important conversations, asking clarifying questions about why workers had left their jobs and what kind of help Matthias could provide. So you'd be helping people who feel like their bosses don't listen to them, Jasper summarized. Something like that. I'd be helping both sides understand each other better and find solutions that work for everyone. That sounds like something you should do, Jasper observed with 7-year-old certainty. Even if you're mad at Evangeline, the workers who need help didn't do anything wrong. The insight was both simple and profound, cutting through Matthias's complex emotions about corporate ethics to focus on the practical impact of his decisions on people who needed effective problem-solving, regardless of consulting industry politics. You're right, Matthias said, realizing that his son had identified the core issue more clearly than he had despite days of careful analysis. Sometimes helping people is more important than protecting your feelings about how opportunities arise. That night, as Matthias modified his resignation letter to include an offer to complete the Morrison Industries project as an independent contractor, he reflected on the moral complexity of forgiveness and professional responsibility. Walking away from Thorne Strategic might satisfy his need for ethical consistency, but it would also abandon clients who needed his specific skills and approach. Perhaps the most authentic response to Evangeline's deception wasn't permanent withdrawal, but rather insistence on transparent terms that acknowledged the problematic foundation while preserving the beneficial outcomes that had emerged from their collaboration. The final version of his letter offered a compromise that felt true to both his principles and his commitment to serving clients effectively. Resignation from permanent employment combined with selective project-based consulting that would allow him to help companies like Morrison Industries while maintaining professional independence from the organization that had recruited him through unethical means. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a recognition that complex situations sometimes required solutions more nuanced than complete rejection or complete acceptance. 1 year later, Matthias stood in the conference room of Blackwood Consulting, his own company, reviewing the final presentation for Morrison Industries, Remarkable Transformation. The walls were lined with thank you letters from clients, framed photographs from successful project completions, and a whiteboard covered with the kind of relationship mapping diagrams that had become his signature approach to organizational problem-solving. Matthias felt the familiar complexity that still accompanied any mention of the woman who had transformed his career through unethical means. Over the past year, they had maintained strictly professional contact limited to occasional industry conference encounters and brief updates about mutual clients who sometimes worked with both organizations. What did she want? Thorne Strategic has received a request for collaboration on a major project, a healthcare system facing crisis that requires both operational efficiency expertise and relationship management skills. The client specifically asked for a joint consulting approach that would combine our methodologies. Matthias walked to his office window, looking out at the Denver skyline where his journey from Ride Connect driver to successful business owner had unfolded. The view included the Thorne Strategic building, where he'd learned to translate his life experiences into professional expertise, though his relationship with that organization remained complex and unresolved. "What's your honest assessment of working with Evangeline again?" he asked Sarah, valuing her perspective as someone who had observed both his departure from Thorne Strategic and his success as an independent consultant. "I think you've proven that your professional abilities are genuine regardless of how they were initially discovered," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "A year of independent success has validated your skills in ways that don't depend on Evangeline's recognition or support. You can engage with her as an equal rather than someone grateful for opportunities she provided." The insight resonated with Matthias's own evolving perspective on their relationship. The anger and sense of betrayal that had driven his departure had gradually been replaced by a more nuanced understanding of how people could make serious ethical mistakes while still contributing value to others' lives. What kind of healthcare project? Regional hospital system with severe staff retention problems, patient satisfaction scores that are damaging their reputation, and operational inefficiencies that are affecting care quality, Sarah explained, reading from her notes. They need someone who can address both the business metrics and the human factors that are creating these interconnected problems. Matthias recognized the challenge as exactly the kind of complex organizational crisis that required multiple areas of expertise. His relationship-based approach would be essential for addressing staff morale and patient experience issues, while Thorne Strategic's operational efficiency methods would be necessary for sustainable systems improvement. It would mean working directly with Evangeline again, as professional partners rather than employer and employee, Sarah pointed out. You'd be negotiating from a position of strength, with proven independent success and clear boundaries about acceptable collaboration terms. That evening, as Matthias helped Jasper with homework at their kitchen table, now in a larger apartment that better reflected their improved financial circumstances, he found himself thinking about the evolution of his relationship with both success and forgiveness. "Dad, you've been thinking really hard about something," Jasper observed, looking up from his math problems with the perceptive attention that continued to amaze Matthias. "Is it about work stuff?" "I'm considering whether to work with someone who made some serious mistakes when we first met," Matthias replied, appreciating his son's ability to listen to complex adult situations without judgment. "Did they learn from their mistakes?" "I think so. They seem to have changed how they do business, and they've acknowledged that what they did was wrong." Jasper considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. "Mrs. Patterson says that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it means not letting someone else's mistakes keep hurting you. Maybe you could work with them if it helps people, but still remember to be careful about trusting them with important things." The wisdom in his son's observation struck Matthias as perhaps the most mature perspective he'd heard on the situation. Forgiveness didn't require forgetting or complete trust. It could mean choosing to focus on positive outcomes while maintaining appropriate boundaries about future interactions. "That's very smart advice," Matthias said, meaning it completely. The next morning, Matthias called Evangeline to discuss the healthcare project collaboration. Their conversation was professional, but not cold, marked by mutual respect that had developed despite the problematic history between them. "I want to be completely transparent about terms," Matthias said. "Blackwood Consulting would partner with Thorne Strategic as equal collaborators, not as a subcontractor. Our methodologies would be integrated rather than subordinated, and both organizations would share credit for successful outcomes." "That seems appropriate given your proven track record," Evangeline replied, her tone carrying what sounded like genuine respect for his professional growth. "Matthias, I know our history is complicated, but I also know that this project needs both of our approaches to succeed. The hospital staff are burned out, the patients feel neglected, and the administration is focused on metrics that aren't improving the real problems. Sounds like our combined specialties could make a significant difference, Matthias agreed, recognizing a client challenge that genuinely excited his problem-solving instincts. There's something else I want to say, Evangeline continued, her voice carrying the kind of vulnerability he'd rarely heard from her. Your success over the past year has proven that my initial assessment of your abilities was accurate, even if my methods for recruiting you were completely unacceptable. I'm grateful that you've built something meaningful from what began as a serious violation of your trust. The acknowledgement felt like the closest thing to a complete apology that their relationship could support, recognition of wrongdoing combined with appreciation for positive outcomes that had emerged despite unethical origins. Thank you for saying that, Matthias replied. I think we can work together effectively while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. 6 months later, the healthcare collaboration had produced results that exceeded both organizations' expectations and established a new model for consulting partnerships that preserved each firm's independence while leveraging their complementary strengths. The hospital system had transformed from a workplace characterized by stress and turnover into an environment where staff felt supported and patients experienced genuine care alongside medical excellence. As Matthias reviewed the final project reports, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had taken him from desperate single father to successful business owner through a series of encounters that had tested every assumption he'd held about trust, authenticity, and professional relationships. The late-night conversation with Evangeline in his Ride Connect car felt like something from another lifetime, but it had set in motion changes that had ultimately aligned his work with his values, while providing Jasper with the stability and opportunities that every child deserved. Standing in his office, surrounded by evidence of genuine professional success built on authentic relationships with clients and colleagues, Matthias realized that sometimes the most important transformations emerged from the most complicated circumstances, proving that authentic human connection could survive even the revelation of its manipulated origins if both parties were willing to choose growth over grievance and collaboration over comfortable distance. The business card that had started everything was framed on his wall now, not as a memento of deception, but as a reminder that unexpected opportunities could emerge from the most ordinary moments, and that professional success meant nothing without the relationships and integrity that made that success meaningful for everyone involved. On Act